I'd like to share my knowledge on preparing a stretch canvas previously prepared with gesso for acrylic or oil painting into a watercolour canvas. Watercolour canvases are available from suppliers but only in certain sizes. This video will demonstrate the process necessary to achieve a watercolour any size or shape other than what you can already buy. The requirements for the demonstration are Absorbent Ground, gesso. It is a gesso, but it's called Absorbent Ground and it's made either with Golden or Daniel Smith. They're the two brands that I've used. There are possibly other brands, but I don't use them. The canvas, I've just got a reasonably inexpensive canvas here that's just been purchased, but you can do any size or any shape for a watercolour canvas or a ground. You can put ground even on a notebook and you could still paint a watercolour on that. You can't paint watercolour, of course, on a round surface because it'll just run off. So it has to be something flat and something that's not too shiny. If I painted a watercolour on my watercolour palette, it's too shiny. It would have to have an undercoat first before you could paint on something like that. The other requirements are a flat tile, something that you can mix your gesso on, a palette knife, a roller, and I've got a reasonably good roller actually. If they're that cheap, sometimes they scratch your actual palette while you're painting on the canvas. It can actually scratch. Water, just a little bit of water available if the ground is too thick and you need to thin it. You need a very fine cover of ground on your actual canvas, otherwise it'll actually be thick and chalky when you paint on it. Wet and dry sandpaper also. Wet and dry sandpaper is to actually sand the canvas before you start to paint. So that's actually sanded. Just a light sanding. Feel your canvas before you start and then feel it after you've actually sanded it. I'm not going to mute this on sanding just so that you can hear the sound that it's actually making. And now it sounds a lot different to where I first started. On the edges it's probably noisy, but it gets a lot softer where it's really, really smoothed out the canvas. There shouldn't be too much, but just give it a brush over just in case there's some fluff or something on the canvas. Make sure you look after your ground as well. And if you don't clean the lids, and that when you actually go to use them again, they will have had air get into that and it will have ruined the whole lot. So just make sure you look after your ground. I'm just going to put enough out here that I think will cover that canvas. And then I'm going to put a small amount of water in it so that it actually will flow onto the actual canvas. As I said, I'm just going to show you that I would always clean the top of that and make sure that the lid is put on properly and not got any air in it. Otherwise, that'll be ruined. A small amount of water is put in that, just enough to sort of move it around a little bit and make sure it's not thick and claggy. So it's a little bit thicker than thickened cream. And so that's got the water mixed into that and it's going to be moved away. And so when it's moved away, it'll give me a surface that I can get the roller into. That is either put in water or you can clean it off with a tissue, but it needs to be clean. Otherwise this can go very, very hard. Now my roller is then sprayed slightly. I'll do it over the water container just to actually make sure that it's not that dry that it absorbs the whole ground as soon as I put it on. That's rolled onto your roller, but you notice I'm rolling away from the actual large amount of gesso because I want it to be a thin layer on the actual roller. Okay, so that's rolled onto the canvas and I don't roll too far before I go back and just make sure I've got relatively the same amount on the roller to continue down. So you need to roll backwards and forwards a little bit because it needs to accept that ground without leaving marks. And if you see big bubbles, then it's too wet. You might have too much water in the ground, but that would be a matter of just rolling a little bit longer. So that's going on. Sometimes it's on your roller at different levels as well, so you'll see marks in it. But believe me, the marks will just come out with time, with rolling and getting that cover on. Right to your edges. I can see a little bit of bubbles coming on here, but that's okay because they'll come out in a minute when I go in a different direction. So it's rolled on to get an even level on to start with. Then I'll actually roll it across the canvas. Already I can see it starting to smooth out. And 2 thin layers is better than a thick layer. That's rolled across. Then I roll diagonally. Even now it's changing again. So it's that rolling. So if you see bubbles in it, or if you think it's really, really thick, keep rolling, change direction again, roll across diagonally. And so that will just smooth out. And then I've got the edges to do. So I don't always paint the edges of the watercolour. I think it's a little bit of a waste on the side of the wall. Sometimes I do an acrylic on the sides. But I still would do wouldn't matter about the gesso you've got on there. I would still do a layer of gesso on the edges, just in case I wanted the scene to go right round the whole artwork. So then that's rolled on. I just need to hold it still. And then the last side, down the bottom. Go back to where my hand just touched it. Put that down. Now that should be a beautiful even coat of gesso. I've got a finger mark there. I'll just roll that out. Just where my finger had held underneath the board. So that dries. And then I'll come back, resand it and put another coat of gesso on it. The next coat of Absorbent Ground will now be added to the canvas. For those that didn't see earlier, it was golden Absorbent Ground. And I've got some on the tile there. I'm going to add just a little bit of water to it. Not much, just enough to make sure that it's not thick. And then I'll actually start to apply the ground. The roller that I'm using has already been washed since the last time that I applied the ground, so it's still just a fraction damp, and that's good, so that it won't absorb this straight away. Push it away so I've got a flat surface to work on. Clean it off the palette knife. And start to apply the ground after you've given the canvas a sand, a very light sand, and that will take any of the rough surface off that may have been left behind from the other application. That feels really, really smooth. This is applied to the roller. Try and get it on an even application on the roller. I'll roll it on the actual tile to make sure it's even and doesn't have edges of paint, of ground that's attached to it. Again, I'll roll down the canvas to start with. Same sort of application. Just lift your roller occasionally, because it actually applies to the roller in different areas, and then the roller sort of rolls and leaves gaps in it, so watch for that as you're actually rolling. Apply more to the actual canvas. Again, I need to lift the roller and stop that action happening. Then moving down again to the other side of it and finish off with the ground. Lift the roller, move the roller to a different position for the reason that it's not going on smoothly. The same as the last application, come across it. I can actually see where it's not applying properly, so you need to be careful of that and just check that it's going on there evenly. Diagonally across, and it's much lighter. The rolling I'm doing now is much lighter going across it. Going back the other way, slow up a bit as I noticed it's very fast on the camera. Then again the sides. Lift it, roll around the sides. Sides are not as that important to me, but they may be to some people. You may want that to have the image that you're painting going right round. You notice again I've got my finger marks in the actual canvas. They're here where my fingers, you'll see my fingers poking through the actual canvas like that. And so when I put it down, I'll just run over that to make sure that it doesn't have those marks left in it. Okay, now that should be a perfect application of gesso for your artwork, and now it's ready to dry. Sand again before you actually start to paint, and do your watercolour on your canvas.